Before we dive into today's story, I want to take just a moment to say something important. If you enjoy heartfelt stories about real relationships, the kind that make you pause, reflect, and sometimes even see life from a completely different perspective, then this channel was made for you. So, before the story begins, take a second to support the channel. Click the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Every like, every comment, and every subscription helps this little community grow, and it truly means more than you know. Now, let's get into the story. Yesterday evening started the way most ordinary evenings do. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual. In fact, if someone had asked me earlier that day how the night would go, I probably would have predicted it almost perfectly. For my husband Ken and me, Thursday nights have quietly turned into something of a tradition over the years. Not the kind of tradition people post about online or plan weeks in advance, but the kind that slowly builds over time without you even realizing it. Simple routines, small comforts, moments that feel so normal that you hardly think about them at all. But sometimes those ordinary moments are the ones that end up changing everything. Dinner that evening had been simple, just roasted chicken, a light salad with lemon dressing, and a bottle of wine we had been saving since the previous weekend. Nothing fancy, just the kind of meal that two people who have lived together for years naturally fall into making. The kitchen still carried the warm scent of garlic, rosemary, and roasted herbs long after we finished eating. The air felt cozy, familiar, like the kind of space that holds years of quiet memories. Ken stood beside me at the sink, sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms, rinsing dishes while I stacked them on the drying rack. This had always been one of those small things about him that I secretly loved. He never had to help with the dishes. In fact, many times I told him not to bother, but he always insisted anyway. Every single time he would grin, roll up his sleeves like he was preparing for some serious task, splash far too much water on the counter, and somehow turn a boring chore into something that felt oddly comforting. Over time, those small moments had become part of our rhythm. Sometimes we talked while we cleaned, sometimes we joked about random things that had happened during the day, and sometimes we didn't talk at all. But the silence between us never felt awkward. It felt peaceful, the kind of silence that only exists between two people who have spent enough years together to understand each other without needing words. Last night, though, the silence felt slightly different. At first, I didn't notice it. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Ken hummed softly while drying a plate, the same tune he had hummed 100 times before. I never knew the name of the song, and honestly, I wasn't even sure he did either. It was just something he absent-mindedly did. But every so often, I noticed him pause just for a moment. His hands would stop moving. His gaze would drift somewhere distant, as if he were staring at something that wasn't really there. Then a second later, he would shake it off and continue drying the dishes like nothing had happened. I didn't think much of it at the time. Everyone has long days sometimes. Work had been stressful for him lately, and occasionally he carried that stress home without meaning to. Still, something about his expression lingered in the back of my mind. After we finished in the kitchen, we followed our usual Thursday night routine. Ken grabbed 2 wine glasses from the counter while I dimmed the living room lights. The soft glow from the lamps filled the room with a warm amber color that made everything feel relaxed. We settled onto the couch together. A thick blanket stretched across our legs. Another small ritual that had slowly become part of our evenings. Then Ken picked up the remote and scrolled through the streaming menu until he found one of our usual comfort shows. Old episodes of Friends. We had watched them so many times over the years that we practically knew the dialogue by heart, yet somehow they still make us laugh every single time. The familiar opening theme started playing. The cheerful music filled the room, followed by the sound of canned audience laughter. For a while, everything felt exactly the way it always did. Warm, predictable, comfortable. Those evenings had always felt like home to me. There was something strangely reassuring about knowing exactly how the night would unfold. We would laugh at the same jokes we had laughed at years ago. Ken would inevitably point out that I reminded him of Monica whenever I started organizing something obsessively, and I would tease him about being a mix between Chandler's sarcasm and Ross's awkwardness. Sometimes we even paused the episode halfway through just to talk about random memories that the show brought up, moments from college, trips we had taken together, funny arguments we barely remembered having. It was simple, and maybe that simplicity was exactly why I loved it so much. But somewhere around the middle of the second episode, something shifted. It was subtle at first. Kin's laughter came a second later than usual. His smile faded a little quicker. And once or twice, I noticed his brow furrow slightly, like a thought had slipped into his mind that refused to leave. At first, I tried to ignore it. But after being with someone for more than a decade, you develop a strange ability to read the smallest changes in their mood, tiny signals that no one else would notice. And right then, something about Ken felt different. The television continued playing in the AI's background, but my attention slowly drifted away from the screen. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. He was staring forward, but I could tell he wasn't really watching the show anymore. His mind was somewhere else. Then suddenly he reached over and gently took my hand. The movement caught me slightly off guard. His fingers felt cool against my skin. When I turned toward him, I noticed he was already looking directly at me. Those deep brown eyes, the same eyes that had first caught my attention more than 10 years ago when we met at a mutual friend's birthday party. There was something different in them now, something serious, something thoughtful. My heart gave a small, unexpected thump in my chest. "Elizabeth," he said quietly. Just hearing him say my name like that made me sit up a little straighter. Kin rarely used that tone unless he had something important to say. Then he asked a simple question. "Can we talk?" The words themselves were ordinary, but the seriousness in his voice instantly changed the atmosphere in the room. The laughter from the television suddenly felt distant, almost irrelevant. For a brief moment, my mind began racing through possibilities. Had something happened at work? Was he worried about something? Had I somehow missed signs that something was wrong? But I quickly pushed those thoughts aside and tried to remain calm. "Of course," I said, attempting to keep my voice casual, even though a small knot of tension had already started forming in my chest. Kin picked up the remote and paused the television. The sudden silence in the living room felt heavier than expected. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Kin took a slow breath. "I've been thinking about us," he said carefully. The words caught me slightly off guard, not because they sounded negative, but because they sounded important. I studied his face, trying to understand where this conversation might be heading. "What do you mean?" I asked gently. Ken leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees while staring down at the floor. For a moment, it seemed like he was choosing his words very carefully. Then he looked back up at me. "Nothing is wrong," he said quickly, almost as if he wanted to reassure me before my mind started worrying too much. "I love you more than ever." A small wave of relief washed over me, but the seriousness in his expression didn't fade. If anything, it deepened. And then he added something that made my curiosity grow even stronger. "That's exactly why I need to tell you something."